Looking back, it's funny how a single ordinary Tuesday evening could completely reroute the trajectory of my life. I mean, who knew that a late bus, a handful of spare change, and a man who looked like he'd just wrestled a bear, or maybe just lost a fight with a very bad day, would be the catalysts for everything that came next. My name's Clara, and honestly my life was pretty standard if a little perpetually stretched thin. I was a barista at The Daily Grind, a cozy, comforting community cafe that felt like a second home, even if the pay barely kept my head above water. My feet were usually aching after a double shift, and my mind was a constant buzz of anxieties, rent, student loans, the stubbornly flickering light bulb in my tiny apartment, the kind of worries that felt uniquely mine. But all of that changed dramatically and irrevocably the night I found myself at a grimy downtown bus stop digging for my last 2 quarters. Just enough for my ride home. That's when he appeared, a man utterly out of a place, dressed in rumpled expensive clothes with a raw, desperate look in his eyes. He tried to board, but the driver Brenda, a woman who lived by the rules, turned him away. No cash, no ride buddy. He looked genuinely lost, humiliated, and in that fleeting moment something in his gaze resonated with a vulnerability I knew all too well. Call it instinct, call it foolishness, but I stepped forward holding out my last coins. "I've got it, driver," for him. I didn't expect anything in return, just a simple act of humanity. But what happened next, what I discovered about him and what he ultimately did in response, well, it truly surprised everyone. This isn't just a story about a poor girl who pays bus fare for a stranger not knowing he is a millionaire. It's about the seismic shifts a single act of kindness can trigger. So buckle up, because my world and his was about to collide in a way neither of us ever saw coming. Stick around, because this is just the beginning of how a poor girl pays bus fare for a stranger not knowing he is millionaire, and what he did surprised everyone. It was past 9, the city exhaling its last hot breath of the day, and I was utterly spent. Another double shift at the Daily Grind, my sanctuary, my breadwinner, my constant reminder of how tight things always were. My feet throbbed a dull, insistent ache that traveled up my calves and settled deep in my bones, and my mind. It was a buzzing hive of anxieties, rent, student loans, the flickering kitchen light that stubbornly refused to die, or perhaps more accurately to live. I shuffled towards my usual bus stop, a familiar, slightly grimy corner in downtown Metropolis. The air was cool now, thankfully carrying that unique urban blend of exhaust fumes and stale coffee. I dug into my pocket, my fingers brushing against the worn fabric, before finding them my last 2 quarters, just enough for the bus. It's always a tightrope walk, isn't it? Every single dollar accounted for, every penny stretched thin until it screamed. That night, those 2 quarters felt like the weight of the world, a fragile tether to getting home. Then, he appeared. He approached the stop like he'd materialized out of the humid night air, looking utterly out of place. His clothes, what I could tell of them beneath the rumples and dirt, screamed designer expensive, the kind of threads I only saw in magazine spreads. But they were torn smudged with something unidentifiable, and his usually neat hair was a wild mess. His eyes, though, were what caught me. Sharp, yes, but holding a raw, desperate kind of fear, the kind that makes your stomach clench in recognition. The bus pulled up its hydraulics, hissing as the doors folded open. He tried to board, a nervous tremor in his hands, but Brenda, our regular driver, a no-nonsense woman with a permanent scowl, shook her head. "No cash, no ride buddy," she said, her voice flat. "Rules are rules." The man looked flustered, his face reddening. I was robbed," he stammered, his voice tight with a humiliation I recognized all too well. "They took everything, my wallet, my phone, even my watch. I just need to get home." Brenda crossed her arms, unimpressed. "Heard it all before, Hannah. Every day a new story. No money, no ride." He closed his eyes for a split second, taking a deep, ragged breath. He looked genuinely desperate, a desperation that surprisingly felt authentic. Call it instinct, call it foolishness, but I'd been there. Not robbed of a fancy suit, no, but robbed of dignity, of hope, of any easy way out. and in that moment his palpable despair resonated louder than my own exhaustion, louder than the quiet voice in my head screaming about my dwindling funds. I didn't think. I just stepped forward, my hand extending the 2 quarters resting in my palm. "I've got it, driver," I said, my voice a little rougher than I intended. "For him." The man's head snapped up. His eyes, a striking shade of hazel, widened, filled with an utter profound shock. He looked at me as if I'd just offered him the moon, not 2 measly quarters. You don't have to do that," he murmured, his voice barely a whisper, laced with a surprise that felt almost vulnerable. I just offered a small, tired smile. "Already did," I replied. "Better get on before she changes her mind." He hesitated for another beat, then nodded slowly, a silent acknowledgement passing between us. He boarded the bus, found an empty seat a few rows ahead of me, and settled in. The bus lurched forward, pulling away from the curb, leaving the city lights blurring in its wake. I watched him, a stranger who had for a fleeting moment needed me. I didn't expect anything, not a thank you, not even a second glance, just a simple act of human decency, but the way he had looked at me, it was a look I knew even then I wouldn't soon forget. You know, when you do something small, something that costs you a little, you usually forget it by morning. It gets filed away, a fleeting blip in the daily grind. But with him, it was different. His face, those piercing hazel eyes, they just sort of stuck in my mind, a ghost of a memory that refused to fade. I woke up the next morning feeling lighter than usual, despite the familiar ache in my feet. The bus encounter had left a peculiar imprint, a quiet satisfaction that hummed beneath the surface of my everyday worries. I recounted the whole thing to Maya, my best friend, during our usual hurried video call before my morning shift. She was still in bed, hair a delightful mess, sipping from a ridiculously oversized mug. "You paid for a random guy?" she asked, a playful skepticism dancing in her eyes. "What if he was a con artist, Clara? You know the I lost everything routine? It's classic." I shrugged, a small smile playing on my lips. Maybe, I admitted. But he didn't feel like one. Just lost, I guess. Like genuinely lost. Maya, bless her heart, always sees the worst-case scenario. It's her way of protecting me, I know. But deep down I knew this wasn't about being naive. It was about seeing a human being in distress, pure and simple. Sometimes you just feel it in your gut. My day at the Daily Grind unfolded as usual. Brewing coffee, the rich, comforting aroma filling the air. Serving pastries, the sticky sweet smell, a welcome distraction. Chatting with my regulars, Mr. Henderson, who always told the same joke, Mrs. Rodriguez, who always asked about my grades. It was a comfortable rhythm, a place where I felt a sense of purpose, even if the pay barely kept my head above water. I truly enjoyed the simple interactions, the quiet hum of community that filled our little cafe. It was my anchor. Then later that week, the bell above the door chimed, and a man walked in. I almost dropped the coffee pot, my breath hitched. It was him. The bus stranger. But not the disheveled, defeated man I'd helped. This man was transformed. He was impeccably dressed, a sharp, dark suit, fitting him like a second skin, screaming expensive without uttering a word. His hair, once a wild tangle, was neatly styled, and his hazel eyes, though still intense, held a different kind of focus, a quiet confidence, almost a predatory calm. He scanned the cafe, his gaze sweeping over the tables, clearly searching for someone. My heart did this weird little flutter in my chest. Not just because he was handsome, which okay, he definitely was in a sculpted magazine cover kind of way, but because he was here, in my world. It felt significant, like a ripple spreading through my carefully constructed calm. He moved with an easy grace that drew eyes, though he seemed oblivious to it. He approached the counter where I was coincidentally wiping down a stubborn coffee stain. My hand paused the rag, suddenly feeling inadequate. "Excuse me," he said, his voice deeper, more resonant, and infinitely more confident than on the bus. "I believe I owe you something." My cheeks flushed, a warmth creeping up my neck. I tried to dismiss it, my words fumbling slightly. "Oh no, that was nothing really. Just a couple of quarters." I waved a dismissive hand, trying to act nonchalant, as if I habitually paid strangers bus fares. He smiled then, a slow, charming smile, that truly reached his eyes, crinkling the corners just so. It wasn't a practiced polite smile. It was genuine disarming. To you, maybe, he replied softly. To me, it was everything. My name's Ethan. Ethan Hayes. Ethan. The name rolled off his tongue, polished and confident, just like the rest of him. I felt a confusing mix of embarrassment and a burning curiosity. He was clearly not lost anymore. The stark contrast between his appearance on the bus and his presence now was almost comical. I suddenly felt self-conscious in my stained apron, acutely aware of the faint smell of roasted beans clinging to my clothes. It was like a scene out of a movie, and I was definitely not the leading lady, but I also couldn't deny the strange magnetic pull of his presence, the lingering question in my mind. What on earth was he doing here? He offered to buy me a coffee, a small gesture to settle the debt, and despite my inner turmoil, I found myself nodding, agreeing to this unexpected, awkward encounter. Ethan Hayes. Even his name sounded polished, like something you'd see etched onto a fancy letterhead or whispered in hushed tones in exclusive circles. And suddenly, my little cafe, The Daily Grind, felt less like a humble community hub and more like a secret hideout for someone who clearly belonged somewhere much grander. The fluorescent lights seemed to hum a little louder, the clatter of ceramic mugs a little sharper, highlighting the stark contrast between his world and mine. He ordered a simple black coffee, no sugar, no cream. Yet even that simple act was performed with a certain elegance. He held the ceramic mug, which felt rough and ordinary in my calloused hands, as if it were fine china. His gaze, as he observed the cafe, was almost analytical, taking in every detail from the chipped paint on the counter to the worn spines of the community library books. It was as if he were cataloging every flaw, every charm of my world. "So, you like working here?" he asked, his voice smooth, pulling me from my silent observations. I shrugged, leaning against the counter. "It's home mostly. The people are good. Keeps me busy." I felt a familiar defensiveness rise within me, a slight bristling at the thought of him, this impeccably dressed stranger passing judgment on my humble workplace. But he just nodded, his hazel eyes fixed on mine. "It has a certain authenticity," he mused, "a real heartbeat." That surprised me. Most people just asked for refills. He actually saw the place. He then started asking about me, not just surface-level pleasantries, but genuine questions about my aspirations. Initially, I was guarded, used to keeping my dreams tucked away safe from the casual dismissiveness of others. But something in his intense gaze, the way he seemed to genuinely listen, disarmed me. He listened, really listened. Not like most people who just waited for their turn to talk, formulating their own replies while you spoke. That was disarming. I found myself opening up about my big, impossible dreams, saving enough to go back to school for business, maybe eventually opening my own community-focused nonprofit, a place where people like me, like us, could find resources, support, a stepping stone. As I spoke, I could almost see the ideas forming in his mind, his gaze unwavering, thoughtful. When it was his turn, however, Ethan was frustratingly vague about his own work. He mentioned finance or investments, vague industry terms that could mean anything from trading stocks to owning banks. He talked about traveling a lot and dealing with complex situations, but offered no specifics, no company names, no typical office anecdotes. He always deflected deftly, turning the conversation back to me with a polite, almost imperceptible charm. It was like he was building a wall of words around himself, polite, conversational, but utterly impenetrable. And that made me even more curious. What exactly was he hiding? My mind, honed by years of observing people at the cafe, picking up on the minute tells of their lives, began to notice the subtle clues that slipped through his carefully constructed facade. The way he instinctively checked his wrist for a watch that wasn't there, the one he'd mentioned being robbed. The faint, expensive scent of a high-end cologne that clung to him even hours after his morning arrival. The way he held his coffee cup with a certain refined grace, or the almost imperceptible flicker of boredom in his eyes when a regular complained about the price of muffins. I had seen rich people before, of course. They occasionally wandered into the daily grind, usually looking lost or slightly bewildered by the absence of valet parking. But they usually didn't ride the bus even after a bad day. They definitely didn't blend in not truly. I chalked Ethan up to being well off, perhaps a consultant or someone in high finance who just had a really, really bad day. What did I know about really rich people anyway? My world was so far removed from theirs, it was almost laughable. Despite the unanswered questions, a quiet routine began to form. Ethan started coming to the daily grind every morning, always around 7:30, just as the sun was beginning to warm the streets. It wasn't just for the coffee, though he always ordered the same black brew. It was to talk to me. Our conversations became a quiet ritual, a pocket of calm in my otherwise chaotic mornings. He learned about my regulars, Mr. Henderson, who always ordered a decaf, even though he secretly loved espresso, and Mrs. Rodriguez, who needed extra napkins for her blueberry scone. He learned about my struggles, my small joys, my dreams for Leo, and I in turn learned about his surprising love for obscure jazz, his dry, understated wit that made me laugh when I least expected it, and a certain profound loneliness in his hazel eyes that seemed to contradict his polished exterior. It was strange, this connection, like we were two planets orbiting each other from vastly different galaxies, but somehow, inexplicably, our paths had crossed, creating a singular, unexpected gravity. The more time I spent with Ethan, the more questions I had. It wasn't just the vagueness, not anymore. It was the way he seemed to exist in a different dimension, even when he was sitting right across from me, sipping our perfectly ordinary, decidedly cheap coffee. He was present, yes, his gaze always attentive, but there was a subtle detachment, a hint that his mind was always operating on a grander scale. My initial curiosity, once a playful intrigue, began to morph into a nagging unease. Ethan's carefully crafted stories, the ones he used to deflect my gentle probes about his life, started to slip. A casual mention of the jet being delayed would pop out quickly, followed by a cough or a swift change of topic. A fleeting reference to a board meeting that sounded far more grand, far more global than a typical finance job. He never talked about family, not a parent, not a sibling or friends or a specific home beyond a vague downtown apartment. It was like he was a character in a meticulously rehearsed play, and I was slowly, unsettlingly realizing he was playing a part. But why? What was the motive behind such an elaborate performance? One afternoon, Maya swung by the daily grind on her lunch break, grabbing a quick pastry. Her eyes, sharp and discerning, immediately landed on Ethan, who was, as usual, seated at his corner table, engrossed in a book. "Who's the mystery man, Clara?" she whispered, nudging my arm playfully. "He looks like he stepped out of a magazine, not off a bus, or out of a neighborhood cafe for that matter." I felt a flush creep up my neck. "Just a regular," I mumbled, trying to sound nonchalant. But Maya wasn't easily deterred. She took a bite of her muffin, her gaze still fixed on Ethan. "He seems too perfect for this place," she said, her voice thoughtful, "like a diamond in a pawn shop. And he looks at you like you hung the moon, by the way." Her playful questions, innocent as they were, only made me more acutely aware of the discrepancies that were rapidly piling up in my mind. The biggest crack in his facade, though, came later that week. I was walking home after a particularly grueling shift, my thoughts consumed by an upcoming utilities bill. As I turned onto my street, my eyes snagged on a sleek black car, the kind that whispered chauffeur-driven even when empty. It was parked a few blocks from my apartment, almost hidden in the shadows of an old oak tree. As I got closer, my breath hitched. Ethan. He was stepping out of the car looking utterly transformed. Gone was the relaxed cafe casual attire. He was dressed in a power suit, sharp lines, and dark fabric, an aura of undeniable authority radiating from him. He was talking intensely into a phone that looked like it cost more than my entire apartment's rent. He didn't see me. His gaze was fixed, his expression serious, almost grim. My heart pounded a frantic drumbeat against my ribs. I instinctively ducked behind the thick trunk of the oak tree, my body pressing into the rough bark. The man on the bus, the gentle soul who frequented my cafe, and that man in the suit. They were three entirely different people, and I had a sickening, undeniable feeling that I only knew one of them, the least real version. I spent that night replaying the scene in my mind, every detail, every nuance. The way the light caught his expensive watch, the almost imperceptible tension in his jaw as he spoke into the phone. A mix of confusion, a sharp pang of betrayal, and a strange sense of naive foolishness swirled inside me. I wondered if I should confront him. But what would I even say? Are you secretly rich? It sounded ridiculous, childish. Yet the undeniable image of him in that car, radiating that air of quiet, formidable authority, was burned into my mind. It wasn't about his money, not really. It was about the secrecy. The profound feeling that he was deliberately keeping a huge, fundamental part of himself hidden from me, and that more than anything felt like a betrayal of the small, genuine connection we'd started to build. It was a secret he held, and I unknowingly had become a part of it. They say ignorance is bliss, and maybe it is. Maybe it's a soft, comforting blanket you pull over your head when the truth is too sharp, too blinding. Because the moment I truly, unequivocally understood who Ethan Hayes was, my world small, as it was meticulously constructed on hard work and bare necessities, felt like it had been turned completely upside down. It wasn't just a jolt, it was a seismic shift. The next morning, I was at the cafe moving through the motions, but my mind was still reeling from what I'd seen the previous afternoon. The image of Ethan, impeccably suited, stepping out of that sleek black car, lingered like a phantom ache. I was wiping down the espresso machine, the familiar scent of rich coffee beans, doing little to calm my churning thoughts, when the low murmur of the small TV mounted in the corner of the daily grind grew louder. It usually played innocuous morning news weather reports, local traffic. But this time, a flash of bold text, a dramatic drumbeat of a headline stole my attention. Breaking news: Ethan Hayes, CEO of Hayes Global Industries, announced as the youngest leader to take the helm of the multi-billion-dollar conglomerate after his father's sudden retirement. The plate I was holding, still warm from a freshly baked scone, almost slipped from my hand. My fingers clenched my knuckles white, my eyes glued to the screen. And there he was, Ethan, impeccably dressed in a sharp dark suit, standing at a podium surrounded by flashing cameras and serious-faced reporters. He looked powerful, confident, utterly in command. He looked and carried himself with an authority that was completely terrifyingly unlike the man who rode my bus, unlike the man who quietly sipped coffee in my cafe. It was like a punch to the gut. Hayes Global Industries, the Hayes Global. The name echoed in my mind, a monolithic titan I'd only ever heard whispered about in financial news, or seen on the gleaming skyscrapers downtown. Everyone knew that name. It was synonymous with unimaginable wealth, with power that shaped cities' fortunes that transcended generations. And he, the man I'd given my last 2 quarters to, was its youngest leader. A cold knot formed in my stomach, tightening with each passing second. The pieces of the puzzle clicked into place, falling with sickening precision, the vague answers about his work, the expensive clothes, the phantom watch, the private chauffeur-driven car, the air of quiet command, even when he was trying to hide it. Everything. The man who had seemed genuinely lost at the bus stop, the man who had been coming to my humble cafe day after day, was one of the wealthiest, most powerful men in the entire city. It wasn't just about the money, not truly. It was about the lie, the elaborate silent deception he'd maintained. He had seen my life, my struggles, the precarious balance I maintained to just exist, and he had let me believe he was just some guy, just some ordinary, slightly mysterious guy, and that hurt more than I could have imagined. It was a wound that went deeper than pride or embarrassment. It was a betrayal of the small, vulnerable space I'd opened up for him. The low murmur from the other customers around me swelled into a confused hum. People at the counter, their eyes also fixed on the TV screen, started whispering, pointing. "Isn't that the guy who comes here every morning?" I heard Mr. Henderson ask Brenda, his voice laced with disbelief. "The one with the hazel eyes? Yeah, looks just like him," Brenda replied, a strange mix of shock and dawning realization on her face. A wave of intense, suffocating embarrassment washed over me quickly, followed by a searing anger. The cafe, usually my haven, suddenly felt like a fishbowl with me at its exposed center. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't stay there under the sudden speculative gazes of my regulars, the hum of the TV broadcasting his secret to the world. My legs just moved, automatically. I ripped off my apron, the familiar fabric feeling rough and alien against my skin, and threw it onto the counter with a soft thud. I walked out of the cafe without a word, leaving my bewildered colleagues and suddenly silent customers behind. I needed to breathe. I needed answers. More than that, I needed to escape it. I needed to escape him. The air outside felt thick, heavy with the weight of his secret suffocating me. I walked aimlessly, my feet pounding against the pavement, the familiar city streets blurring around me. But no matter how fast I walked, no matter how far I went, the image of Ethan, powerful and unapproachable on that TV screen, was burned into my mind, a stark, painful reminder of the chasm that separated our worlds, and how easily he had crossed it while I remained firmly rooted on my side. The anger was a hot, burning thing searing through me, leaving a bitter taste in my mouth. But beneath it there was a deep, unsettling ache. An ache for the connection I thought we had, for the simple trust I'd foolishly so naively given. How could he? How could he stand there day after day in my cafe pretending to be someone he wasn't? I'd walked aimlessly for hours, the city's cacophony a dull thrum against my raw nerves. My legs had taken me through parks, down bustling avenues, until eventually they led me back to the familiar, comforting solace of my small apartment building. But as I approached, my stomach lurched. He was there, waiting, leaning against the old brick wall near my door, looking concerned, his usual composed demeanor replaced by a hesitant vulnerability that even now tugged at something deep inside me. He straightened as he saw me, his hazel eyes so full of quiet intensity just yesterday, now clouded with something akin to apprehension. "Clara," he said, his voice low, careful, "I saw the news. I knew you would." I cut him off, a tremor running through me, fueled by barely suppressed fury. "You knew," I spat the words burning on my tongue. "You knew, and you let me believe. What, that you were just some ordinary guy who needed a bus fare while you own half the city, while you run a multi-billion-dollar empire?" My voice trembled, rising with each accusation. The sheer audacity of it, the quiet arrogance, it was suffocating. Ethan flinched, his shoulders tensing. He ran a hand through his perfectly styled hair, messing it slightly, a small, familiar gesture that felt like a punch to the gut. He tried to explain, his words tumbling out, rushed and urgent. He spoke of the immense pressure of his family's legacy, the constant scrutiny, the relentless demands. He said he was exhausted by a world where people only ever saw his name, his money, his power, never him. He explained that the bus incident was a rare, chaotic moment of true anonymity, an unexpected escape from a life he felt utterly trapped in. He claimed he'd found something genuine with me, a connection untainted by his wealth, and he'd been terrified of losing it if I knew the truth. He spoke of a gilded cage of overwhelming expectations, of a life that wasn't truly his own. He painted a vivid picture of constant demands, the suffocating lack of genuine relationships, the gnawing fear of being used, of being loved only for what he possessed. And for a fleeting moment, just a fleeting one, I almost understood. Almost. But then another part of me, the part that had walked a tightrope for every dollar, rebelled. "So you thought deceiving me was the best way to get to know the real me?" I challenged him, my voice laced with bitter irony. "What about the real you, Ethan? The one who hides who he is? The one who can afford private jets but watches me count quarters for a bus ride?" The words felt like daggers, each one aimed at the elaborate facade he'd constructed. The irony of him seeking authenticity while being inauthentic himself was a raw wound. It made my stomach clench. He looked down, his gaze fixed on the worn pavement, a muscle ticking in his jaw. "I admit it was a mistake. A huge mistake," he said, his voice low, raw with regret. "I should have told you sooner, but my feelings for you, Clara, they are real, regardless of my identity, regardless of all of this." He gestured vaguely, encompassing not just the building, but perhaps the entire world he inhabited. I listened, torn between the burning anger and a strange, grudging empathy. Part of me wanted to dismiss it all as a convenient excuse, a desperate plea from someone caught in their own web of lies. But another part, a small, stubborn part, saw the undeniable flicker of raw honesty in his hazel eyes, the vulnerability he rarely showed. He painted a picture of a gilded cage, and for the first time I saw that even immense wealth could come with its own kind of poverty, a stark, aching poverty of genuine connection. The conversation ended not with a resolution, but with a fragile truce. I wasn't ready to forgive, not fully, not yet, but I was willing to listen. I told him I needed time, space, and above all, complete, uncompromising honesty. "If you want any chance of whatever this is," I said, my voice softer now but firm, "you need to be completely transparent from now on. No more secrets. Not one." The air between us was still thick with unspoken words, with lingering hurt, but a tiny, almost imperceptible thread of hope had been woven through the tension. It was a fragile beginning, or perhaps a precarious pause before the real complexities began. Trust once broken isn't easily mended. It's like trying to put shattered glass back together. You can glue it, you can fuse it, but the cracks are always there, spiderwebbing across the surface, a constant reminder of what was fractured. And with Ethan, the cracks weren't just invisible fissures, they were made of billions of dollars of a life so grand it dwarfed my own. The days following the revelation and our strained conversation were cautious, strained. Ethan continued to visit the daily grind, almost a silent plea for forgiveness, but the dynamic between us was undeniably different. I was more reserved, my usual open warmth replaced by a watchful distance. I observed him testing his honesty with every shared glance, every carefully chosen word, and he in turn seemed more open, sharing snippets of his other life, albeit carefully like delicate artifacts. He was trying. I could see that. He wasn't just talking, he was showing me little by little the world he inhabited, and that more than any apology made a difference. One unusually quiet afternoon, after the lunch rush had dwindled, Ethan found me restocking shelves. "I want to show you something," he said, his voice soft, almost hesitant. "My office. Not to impress you, just to demystify it, so you can see." I agreed, a knot of apprehension and curiosity tightening in my stomach. The next day he picked me up in a regular, unassuming sedan, no chauffeur, no black car. It was a small, intentional gesture I appreciated. As we approached the gleaming glass towers of downtown, my breath hitched. Hayes Global. The name was etched in sleek, modern script above the grand entrance. It was even more imposing up close. Stepping into Hayes Global was like stepping into a different dimension. The air was different, crisp, cool, humming, with an almost silent energy. The people were different too. Everyone moved with a quiet purpose, their faces focused, their clothes impeccably tailored. The bustling floors, the hushed power emanating from every corner. It was overwhelming. My cafe, with its comforting smells and familiar faces, felt a million miles away. Ethan led me through a maze of corridors, past buzzing open-plan offices and hushed conference rooms, until we reached his own office. It was vast, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of the city I usually only saw from my tiny apartment window. A sprawling desk, a wall of awards, and an executive assistant, Sarah Chen, who greeted him with an almost reverential respect. In this environment, I saw him truly in his element, commanding respect, making decisions, his mind clearly operating at a speed I could barely comprehend. It was both impressive and intimidating. He, the man who'd been so disheveled on the bus, who'd seemed so lost, was the king of this empire. During these visits, because yes, there were more, I found myself drawn back, needing to understand, Ethan started revealing even more personal details. He spoke about the crushing pressure from his late father, a shadow that still loomed large over his life, dictating his every move. He described the profound loneliness of his position, the constant, exhausting battle to prove himself worthy, not just to the board, but to his own ingrained sense of duty. He talked about his passion projects, the ones often overlooked by his family, and the traditional corporate machine initiatives involving sustainable energy, ethical sourcing, and community development. And to my surprise, these deeply personal interests, these quiet passions aligned uncannily with my own values, my own dreams of giving back. He wasn't just a rich guy. He was a rich guy with a soul and a lot of baggage. And for the first time seeing the quiet desperation in his eyes as he spoke of his burdens, I felt a flicker of genuine empathy for the immense weight he carried. It wasn't the kind of burden I knew, but it was a burden nonetheless. Still, even as my understanding grew, my resolve held firm. I made it clear to him in no uncertain terms that while I appreciated his honesty, I wouldn't be drawn into his world of luxury, not in the way most people would assume. I insisted on maintaining my independence, my job at the daily grind, and my simple, hard-earned life. My little apartment, my community, my 2 quarters, they were me. I wanted a connection with him that was based on who we were as people, not what he had or what he could give me. I wasn't going to be another accessory, a pretty face to adorn his arm at galas. My life, my dreams, my struggles, they were mine. And if he couldn't respect that, if he couldn't see the value in me beyond his immense wealth, then this whole precarious, fascinating thing we were building was a non-starter. It's one thing to say you'll keep your world separate. It's a brave, perhaps foolish declaration when one of those worlds operates on a scale you can barely comprehend. It's another thing entirely when those worlds inevitably, beautifully, sometimes painfully start to crash into each other. And trust me, when a multi-billion-dollar world collides with a 2 quarters bus fare world, things get gloriously, wonderfully messy. After our fragile truce, Ethan truly started to spend more time in my world. He didn't just visit the daily grind. He became a regular fixture at the community center that housed it. He started volunteering, helping with small projects, organizing book drives, lending a surprisingly strong hand with setting up for local art exhibits. He genuinely engaged with the people who frequented the center, listening to their stories, laughing at Mr. Henderson's jokes, even trying to learn a few words of Spanish from Mrs. Rodriguez. He learned about my passion for local initiatives, the constant uphill battle to secure even meager funding for community programs. He wasn't just observing anymore, he was participating, and seeing him, the CEO of a global empire, patiently helping a group of kids paint a mural or coordinating donations for a local food drive was humbling. And I have to admit, incredibly attractive. It wasn't just his power, but his willingness to shed it even for a moment that captivated me. But as expected, his world wasn't just going to quietly let him go. Challenges started to ripple in from his side. His family, particularly his stern aunt Eleanor Hayes, a woman who seemed to embody the very essence of old money and rigid expectations, began to notice his new interests. Eleanor was a powerful figure within Hayes Global, a silent force on the board, and she had a way of making her disapproval felt without uttering a single sharp word. Just a look, a raised eyebrow, a hint of a smile that never quite reached her cold eyes. She started making more frequent appearances at his office, her subtle inquiries always circling back to my involvement in his life. She expressed her disapproval, hinting that I was a distraction, or worse, an opportunist. Ethan, bless him, defended me fiercely. Clara isn't a distraction, Aunt Eleanor, she's an inspiration. But the tension was palpable. I saw the way his family, the few I encountered at a discreet charity gala he reluctantly brought me to, looked at me. Like I was a stray cat he'd brought home, interesting perhaps, but ultimately out of place. It was uncomfortable, yes, but it also solidified my resolve not to change for them, not to try and fit into a mold I wasn't meant for. My value wasn't determined by their approval. Of course, challenges rippled in from my side too. My friends, especially Maya, were wary. She loved me fiercely, and her protectiveness was always at the forefront. "He's too far out of your league, Clara," she said one evening as we sat on my fire escape sharing a cheap pizza. "Someone like him, he could easily break your heart, or worse, use you, and you wouldn't even see it coming until you're left with nothing but memories of a private jet." Her words were laced with genuine concern. I had to constantly reassure her, and frankly myself, that this was different. It's not like that Maya I'd insist trying to articulate a feeling that even I struggled to fully grasp. He's trying to understand me, and I'm trying to understand him. My friends meant well. They just couldn't fathom why someone like him, a man who could buy and sell their entire neighborhood, would be genuinely interested in someone like me. And sometimes late at night, in the quiet solitude of my apartment, I still couldn't either. It was a leap of faith for all of us. Then a true bridge began to form. Ethan, having seen my dedication, impressed by my vision for a local youth mentorship program that had been stuck in fundraising limbo for months, offered to help. Not with a flashy public donation, but through a discreet charitable foundation. He managed one that flew under the radar of his corporate life. This became our first true collaborative project, something we built from the ground up together. It was a bridge between our two vastly different worlds, forged not just on personal connection, but on shared values, on a mutual desire to make a tangible difference. This was it. This was where our worlds could actually meet, could actually intertwine, without losing their individual identities. Not just him stepping into mine, or me stepping into his, but us building something together, brick by brick, dream by dream. You think you can keep a secret when one of you is a public figure, when one of you's face is plastered on financial news channels, and their name is synonymous with multi-billion-dollar deals? Think again. The media, like a pack of hungry wolves, always finds a scent. And our scent, apparently the unlikely pairing of a tech mogul and a cafe worker, was utterly, tragically irresistible. It started subtly. A blurry photo in a local gossip rag snapped while Ethan and I were attending a small neighborhood fair for the community center. We were laughing, sharing a bag of popcorn, oblivious. The caption read, "Who is the mystery woman with CEO Ethan Hayes?" It was just a whisper, then easily dismissed. But whispers turn into murmurs, and murmurs, when fueled by insatiable curiosity, ignite into a roaring fire. Soon the whispers escalated into outright speculation. My face, once invisible to the wider world, was suddenly everywhere. Tabloids screamed headlines like Hayes' new hobby, a commoner crush, or from bus fare to billionaire's babe. The articles were sensational, intrusive, and often demeaning, reducing me to nothing more than a curious accessory, a fleeting distraction for a man of vast importance. It was a nightmare. Suddenly, my life was being dissected by strangers, my intentions questioned, my character assassinated without a single fact. I went from being comfortably invisible to being a scandalous headline, and it was terrifying. The scrutiny was relentless. Reporters, aggressive and relentless, started showing up at the daily grind, hoping to get the story from me. They'd shove microphones in my face while I was trying to serve lattes, ask leading questions about how I met Ethan, hint darkly about gold digging in thinly veiled comments. My colleagues, bless their hearts, tried to shield me, but they were overwhelmed, caught in a media circus they never signed up for. Brenda, our tough-as-nails bus driver, even chased off a particularly persistent reporter with a broom. It was almost funny if it hadn't been so soul-crushing. I felt exposed, utterly vulnerable. Every coffee I poured, every smile I gave a customer, felt like it was being judged, analyzed, twisted. Was I good enough? Was I just a fleeting phase? Was I deep down just a gold digger who had gotten lucky? The whispers, even the ones in my own head, were deafening. I felt a constant knot of anxiety in my stomach, a pervasive fear that my simple, hard-won life was being swallowed whole by his. Ethan, of course, was furious. Not at me, but at the media's relentless intrusion. He saw the toll it was taking. He took immediate action, his corporate world experience kicking in. He issued a public statement acknowledging me unequivocally as his partner. The word itself felt monumental, terrifying, and profoundly moving. He condemned the invasive reporting demanding respect for our privacy. He used his immense influence to try and shield me, to deflect the unwanted attention. He called the editors, threatened lawsuits, pulled strings. He was my knight in shining armor in a way. He fought for me. But even as I appreciated his protective stance, a part of me hated that I needed saving. I was used to fighting my own battles, to standing on my own 2 feet. This felt disempowering, even as it warmed my heart. The damage to my peace of mind, to my quiet life, was already done. And then his family reacted, specifically Eleanor Hayes. She was livid. Her face, usually so composed, was contorted with cold fury when she confronted Ethan. She saw me not as a partner, but as a liability, a stain on the family's pristine, carefully constructed public image. This situation, she hissed at him over the phone, a conversation I overheard him having in hushed, frustrated tones, is unacceptable, Ethan. It's a distraction, a disgrace. You need to end it, now. Before it jeopardizes everything you've worked for, everything your father built. She didn't just threaten his position within the company, she threatened his legacy, his identity, the very foundation of his life. Her words, even secondhand, cut deep. His family saw me as a problem, a distraction, a threat to their carefully guarded world. And for a moment, a terrifying, agonizing moment, I wondered if they were right. Was I dragging him down? Was my humble existence too heavy a weight for his gilded life? The thought, chilling and persistent, haunted me, threatening to unravel the fragile threads we had so carefully begun to weave between our 2 colliding worlds. When everything around you is chaos, when the world outside your small, carefully built bubble is screaming, judging, and demanding, that's when you truly find out what you're made of. And perhaps more importantly, that's when you find out what the person you're with is really made of too. This wasn't just about Ethan and me anymore. It had escalated. It was about everything we stood for, every value we'd found in each other. The media storm, fueled by Eleanor's subtle machinations, reached a fever pitch. And then came the inevitable, the ultimatum. Eleanor Hayes herself delivered it to Ethan, not over the phone, but in person at his grand office, a place that felt more like a fortress than a workplace. I wasn't there, but Ethan recounted it to me later, his voice tight with a mixture of exhaustion and cold fury. "You have a choice," Ethan Eleanor had told him, her voice, he said, like ice. "End this distraction with that girl, or forfeit your chance to fully control Hayes Global. Your father's legacy, your birthright, it's one or the other." It was a devastating blow. Leading the company wasn't just a job for Ethan. It was his lifelong burden, yes, but also in a strange, complicated way, his very identity. It was what he'd been groomed for, born into. It was the air he breathed, the ground beneath his feet. My personal commentary? It was the ultimate test. His empire, his destiny, or me. And I knew deep down what the logical, sensible choice for him should be, but I also knew with every fiber of my being what I desperately hoped he would choose. The news of the ultimatum, though not public, permeated the hushed circles of the elite. Whispers reached even me through Maya, whose friend worked for a rival firm. My heart ached with a crushing weight of guilt. I didn't want to be the reason Ethan sacrificed his legacy, his life's work. The pressure on him must have been unbearable. I started to seriously consider walking away, convincing myself it was for his own good. It was for the company, for his family name. It would tear me apart, I knew, but wouldn't it be the selfless thing to do? My practical side, the part of me that had always rationalized every sacrifice, screamed at me to let him go. He had a world to conquer. I had a cafe, a small dream, a life that frankly didn't need his billions to be complete. But my heart, foolish as it was, refused to listen to logic. It clung to us with a desperate, unwavering grip. Ethan retreated into himself for a few days. We had long, difficult conversations stretched across late nights, whispered doubts, and moments of profound silence. He paced his apartment, the city lights below him mirroring the chaos in his mind. I saw the struggle, the immense weight of generations of expectation pressing down on him. He wasn't just choosing between a company and a person, he was choosing between a predetermined path and an uncertain future, between expectation and authenticity. And then he made a decision, a bold, unexpected decision that shocked me to my core. He refused to give me up. He looked at me, his hazel eyes clear and resolute, and told me he wouldn't abandon what we had found. He then went further. He announced his intention to lead Hays Global in a new revolutionary direction, one that echoed the sustainable and ethical initiatives he and I had discussed, the ones that truly aligned with his own quiet passions. It meant clashing head-on with his family's old guard, with the very foundation of how they'd always done business. It meant a fight, a huge, arduous battle, but he was ready. My personal commentary: he chose me. Not just me, the girl from the cafe, but the values we shared, the genuine connection, the possibility of a different, more meaningful legacy. It wasn't about love conquering all in a saccharine fairy tale way. It was about integrity, about choosing who he truly was, even if it meant disrupting his entire world. It was the most shocking, most beautiful declaration I could have imagined, a silent promise louder than any spoken vow. The very next day, Ethan held a press conference. It wasn't just to address the rumors that swirled around his personal life, though he acknowledged them with a calm, unyielding dignity. It was to announce a major shift in Hays Global's philanthropic and investment focus. He spoke passionately about sustainable development, about community empowerment, about ethical business practices that prioritized people and the planet alongside profit. He looked every bit the powerful CEO, but there was a new fierce light in his eyes, a genuine conviction that transcended corporate speak. And then the real surprise came. He publicly credited me, not just as his partner, a word already loaded with meaning, but as his inspiration. He spoke of the bus ride, of my small act of kindness, of how it had awakened him to a different perspective, a more authentic way of living and leading. He spoke of my work at the Daily Grind, my dreams for the community center, my unwavering belief in the power of ordinary people. My personal commentary: that was the moment. The real surprise. Not just that he was a millionaire, that was old news. It was that he was willing to risk it all, his inheritance, his reputation, his family's approval, to redefine his entire world, to align his vast power with something as intangible as genuine connection and shared purpose. He truly surprised everyone, including himself, by choosing to build something new, something real, something that resonated with his soul, rather than just inheriting a legacy. The cameras flashed, the reporters scribbled furiously, and somewhere I knew Eleanor Hays was undoubtedly seething. But in that moment, all I felt was a profound, overwhelming sense of awe and a quiet, fierce hope. The dust settled eventually, but the ground beneath us had shifted irrevocably. We weren't just a couple anymore, two people navigating a surprising, tender connection. We were a statement, a living, breathing testament to the idea that purpose could trump profit, that authenticity could challenge tradition, and building something real, something lasting together turned out to be harder, messier, and infinitely more rewarding than I ever could have imagined. The aftermath of Ethan's public stand was predictably a whirlwind. He faced significant backlash from some of the more entrenched board members at Hays Global, and of course from his Aunt Eleanor. Her icy disapproval could have frozen a desert. Whispers of a hostile takeover, of a challenge to his leadership, swirled through the corporate corridors. But crucially, he also gained unexpected support. There were others within the company, often the younger, more forward-thinking executives who were tired of the old ways, hungry for a vision that transcended pure financial gain. They saw Ethan's bold move as an opportunity, a chance to modernize and truly make a mark. He wasn't just talking the talk. He was walking the walk, facing down a legacy, and watching him fight for what he believed in, for our vision, made me incredibly proud. My own role in all of this grew organically. While I was never officially part of Hays Global, Nor did I ever want to be. I became an informal advisor on community outreach and ethical investments. Ethan would often call me sometimes late at night, sometimes during a frantic 15-minute break to bounce ideas off me, to ask for my perspective on a new initiative. My insights, grounded in real-world experience from the trenches of community work, often proved invaluable. I could tell him how a new policy would actually impact families on the ground, or what a community truly needed, not just what a spreadsheet suggested, and the daily grind that remained my anchor, my grounding. I continued to work there, diligently brewing coffee and managing the local outreach programs housed within the community center. I used my position, my voice, to champion local causes, to organize fundraisers, to inspire others to get involved. I wasn't a trophy wife paraded at galas. I was a partner, yes, but a partner rooted firmly in my own identity, my own purpose. My cafe, my community, they kept me real. They kept us real. It was where I felt most like myself, and where Ethan seemed to find a quiet kind of peace. Learning to navigate our vastly different lives, to truly merge them without losing ourselves, became our new normal. We found common ground in our shared values, in our commitment to making a positive impact on the world. But it wasn't always smooth sailing. There were challenges, daily adjustments. Balancing his demanding globe-trotting schedule with my own community work, which, while less glamorous, was no less demanding. Dealing with the lingering public curiosity, the occasional paparazzi, flashed the subtle whispers when we walked into a restaurant. And of course the occasional snide remark from some of his more traditional family members, who still viewed me with thinly veiled disdain. It wasn't a fairy tale ending where I suddenly became a socialite shedding my past like an old skin. It was messier, more complicated, and infinitely more real. We were building something new, brick by brick, compromise by compromise. Through all these trials, our bond deepened, growing richer, more resilient. We learned to communicate openly, even when the truth was difficult. We learned to support each other's dreams, even when they seemed to pull us in opposite directions. We found strength in our differences, a unique balance that made us stronger together. I taught Ethan about the profound value of simplicity, the quiet joy of genuine human connection, the power of a single kind gesture. And he in turn helped me realize the incredible scale of impact I could have when my passion was amplified by the right resources and support. We were two halves of a very unlikely whole. He brought the power and the vision, the ability to make things happen on a grand scale. I brought the grounding, the heart, the unwavering focus on the human element, and together we were building something truly extraordinary. Life has a funny way of bringing you full circle. One moment you're counting your last 2 quarters for a bus ride. The next you're standing on the precipice of a future you never could have even dreamed of. And the biggest surprise of all, it wasn't about the fortune Ethan had in his bank account. It was about the unseen fortune we found together in shared purpose and genuine connection. Years later, the dust truly settled. Ethan and I had established ourselves as a formidable force both personally and professionally. Hayes Global, once a rigid old money empire, had transformed under Ethan's visionary leadership. It was now a recognized leader in sustainable practices and socially responsible business, making real tangible impacts globally. This monumental shift was due in large part to Ethan's unwavering commitment, yes, but also undeniably to the quiet, persistent influence I had on his perspective. We proved them all wrong, the cynics, the doubters, even some of his own family members who had stubbornly clung to the old ways. We showed them through action that purpose and profit weren't mutually exclusive. They could in fact amplify each other. My own dream, born from humble beginnings, had blossomed. I had successfully launched my nonprofit, The Common Ground. It had grown from a small idea in my apartment to a thriving hub for community development, offering everything from youth mentorship and job training to fresh food initiatives. It was funded in part by Hayes Global's newly established philanthropic arm, a testament to Ethan's promise. The daily grind remained, of course, a beloved local spot, still brewing the best coffee in the neighborhood, a warm, comforting symbol of where it all began. My little cafe, my dream had blossomed beyond anything I could have imagined, and it was all because of 2 quarters and a man who had seen something in me beyond my circumstances. One crisp autumn evening, years after that fateful bus ride, Ethan and I found ourselves standing at that very same bus stop in downtown Metropolis. We were bundled in coats, sipping warm coffees from the daily grind, watching the city lights flicker to life. The air was cool, carrying that familiar scent of exhaust and coffee, a smell that now felt less like resignation and more like a quiet triumph. We weren't waiting for a bus. We were just there together, a shared, quiet moment amidst our bustling lives. It all started here, didn't it? He murmured, his voice soft, a hint of wonder in his tone, as he gazed at the curb. My worst day became my best. I smiled, leaning my head on his shoulder. My last 2 quarters became everything. He reached into his pocket, then his fingers brushing against something. He pulled out 2 gleaming quarters, freshly minted, and subtly slipped them into my hand. Our fingers brushed, sending a familiar warmth through me. It was a quiet reminder, a personal touchstone to our origin story. It was never about the money, not truly. It was about that moment of kindness, that small instinctual leap of faith I took on a tired Tuesday night. It was about the willingness to see beyond the surface, to recognize the raw humanity in a stranger, regardless of their outward appearance. That's where the real fortune lay. The ultimate surprise was not just that the poor girl paid for a millionaire. It was that this simple act of kindness fundamentally, irrevocably changed both our lives, intertwining them in ways neither of us could have foreseen. It led us to a partnership built on authenticity, shared values, and a profound commitment to making a tangible difference in the world, far beyond what anyone, including us, had ever expected. My life didn't just change. It expanded. It deepened. And it all started with 2 quarters and a stranger who became my everything. The unseen fortune wasn't in his bank account. It was in the incredible, improbable journey we took together, a journey that continues to unfold rich with purpose and an abundance of genuine connection. Here I stand today, a living testament to a truth I stumbled upon on a seemingly insignificant Tuesday night. My journey with Ethan, from those 2 quarters on a bus to building a life of purpose, has taught me that fortune isn't always measured in currency, and connection isn't always found in commonality. I used to believe that life was about surviving, about meticulously counting every penny, about striving for a comfort that felt perpetually out of reach. But then a man who had every comfort imaginable showed me what it meant to truly be lost, to crave a connection that transcended material wealth. And in helping him and seeing his vulnerability, I discovered a profound truth about myself and about humanity. This story isn't just about a rich man and a poor girl. It's about seeing beyond the labels we impose, the assumptions we make. It's about the courage to offer a hand even when your own resources are scarce. It's about the willingness to be truly seen, to shed the masks we wear, and to confront the uncomfortable truths about ourselves. Ethan taught me that immense wealth can come with its own unique kind of loneliness, a gilded cage built of expectations and isolation. And I, in turn, showed him that true richness lies in community, in purpose, in the simple, messy beauty of human interaction. So what can we take from this, the power of small acts? Never underestimate the ripple effect of a single act of kindness. Those 2 quarters weren't just bus fare. They were a catalyst that changed 2 lives, and through our shared projects touched many more. Your smallest gesture could be someone else's biggest turning point. Look beyond the surface. We live in a world obsessed with appearances, with titles, bank accounts, and carefully curated images. But true worth, true character often lies hidden beneath layers of circumstance, whether it's poverty or immense wealth. Take the time to truly see people, to listen to their unspoken stories. You might find connection in the most unexpected places, authenticity over everything. Ethan's greatest struggle initially was his inability to be authentic, to show his true self. My journey, too, was about holding on to my authenticity amidst the overwhelming pressure of his world. In a world that constantly demands we conform, choosing to be genuinely unapologetically, you is perhaps the most courageous act of all. Purpose beyond profit. We've seen how a global corporation can shift its entire paradigm to prioritize ethics and social responsibility. This isn't just a corporate lesson, it's a life lesson. What are you building? Is it merely for personal gain, or does it serve a greater purpose? Finding that deeper why can give your life a richness no financial ledger can quantify. Life, as I've learned, is not about the hand you're dealt, but how you choose to play it. It's not about the size of your fortune, but the depth of your connections. It's not about avoiding the mess, but finding meaning within it. And sometimes, the most valuable treasures are the ones you never set out to find, unearthed in moments of quiet courage and unexpected kindness. If this story resonated with you, if it made you pause and think about the unseen fortunes in your own life, I'd love to hear your reflections. Leave a comment below and share your thoughts. And if you're hungry for more stories that explore the unexpected depths of human connection and the surprising twists life can take, then don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit that notification bell so you won't miss our next video. Thank you for listening, and remember, the richest discoveries are often found in the simplest acts.